Hello and welcome to the second session of today in Data and Analytics track of the second week of Devtoberfest. If you are new for Devtoberfest, then and this is the first session you are joining, then I would like to remind that this is the whole month's celebration of what developers like the most, meaning coding, collaboration, having some fun. We prepared 5 different tracks for you this year, and depending on your interest, you can choose between ABAP, user interface, data and analytics. This is the Wednesday sessions that you are watching right now. Thursday is low code, no code tooling, and Friday cloud native development, spiced with some fun Friday activities as well. If you are interested in data and analytics, then there is a blog post of mine that lists all the sessions during this whole month. I'm going to share the link as well in the chat. YouTube, if you're watching this live, then obviously you can benefit from that. As well, if you're watching this live, please remember that we are looking for your questions to our presenters. As well, if you are watching the recording of this session, then please post your questions in the on the session page in SAP community. So we are, as I mentioned, on the second session of the day today, discussing how to enhance analytic applications functionality in SAP Analytics Cloud with some simple scripting. And we've got the guest speaker for this session, James Barlow from Mindtree. And I will pass the microphone in just a few minutes to him. But I would like to invite you as well to some other Wednesdays, to some sessions that are coming on October 19 and October 26. On October 19th, we will have sessions specifically for data warehousing cloud, and on October 26th for SAP data intelligence. One more very important sessions and very special session today. We are going to have our SAP CTO and the member of executive board, Jürgen Miller, joining in 1 hour. So looking forward to you joining that session as well. And with that, I would like to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to James.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just quickly share my screen. Right, you'll be pleased to know there's no PowerPoint. I've done the introduction in SAC as well. So I'm just refreshing up an Analytic app now, and then we'll go through the overview and have a quick look at the agenda. So really, I was asked to do this presentation based on a few blog posts I've done on the SAP forums. Really just a few bits and pieces, mainly driven by client requests over the past year or so. People asking for, sort of drop-down menus. How can we change the way visualizations appear on the screen? Can we fade stuff? Can we have a button? Can we click and move content around screen? So a lot of this has been driven by client request. So I'm going to cover off as much as I can in 30 minutes. We may have a little bit more time at the end. So we're going to look at drop-down effects, how we can animate panels to give the effect of a drop down and use that in the menu. We're going to look at the fade effect. We are going to look at using free text search as a filter. Kind of a work in progress, this one. But again, customers have asked me for this in some of their dashboards, so it's quite a useful one. We'll have a quick look at an Analytic app, which is loosely based on one that I built for a customer, which encompasses quite a few of these different components, and then at the end, a sort of a pet project, the Pac-Man dashboard. But for now, let's have a look at the drop-down effect first of all. Apologies if the resolution is a bit small for some people. We've had to do a last-minute laptop switch as well, so the screen is quite small from my side. So the first one we're going to look at is really animating panels, because in SAP Analytic Applications and also SAP Stories, there is a drop-down widget, but it's quite limited as to what you can do with it. You can put data in it. You can do a bit of formatting on it, but people actually have been asking me for actual full-on drop-down menus, so kind of actually doing vertical and horizontal menus. And also we'll look at A, how to create this effect, and B, certain things that don't work. So if you have scrolling and more panels, it screws it up. As you can see, it's very slow. So if we edit this analytic app, what I'll probably do is I'll just talk about the vertical panel, because the logic for horizontal scrolling is exactly the same. It's a very simple effect to create. I think this is going to be, this is where the zoom in while doing the coding bit. What we're essentially doing with this effect is getting the size of the panel and then incrementally increasing it by X pixels, which gives you the drop-down effect. So when we initialize the application, what I'm doing is for the vertical panel, I'm initially setting the height to 16 pixels because we don't want it to show on screen. So we've got the two panels. Let's just move this down a bit. So I've had to use a container panel, because what we do when we click the button to initiate the effect is we have to show a panel. We have to set it to visible. Now, if this parent panel was fully blue, you'd get a blue line that appears, which kind of ruins the effect. So we've had to create a transparent panel, and then within that, put the color panel. So when this first appears, all you're seeing is this white bit here. And then as the parent panel grows, then you see the sub panel appear as well. So if we look at the script that's being used to do this, I apologize in advance to any proper Java developers. I'm self-taught, so some of the code you might think it's a bit messy. So essentially what we're doing is we're grabbing the height of the parent panel, and then we're saying, if it's not visible, first of all, set the parent panel to visible true. And then we're literally just saying, if it's less than 416 pixels high, increase the height by increments of 10 pixels. And at each loop, we then set the height to the new height. So it'll start off as 16, and then it'll go to 26, 36, 46, and so on, until it basically hits that magic number. And to reduce the panels exactly the same, you're kind of grabbing the height and you're just incrementing back down, and then finally setting it to hidden. There's a few things to note when I've been playing with this effect is you can't use, so if we go to here, for this to work, you have to use fixed pixel height, because if you have this set to automatic pixels, the API doesn't work. You can't grab the height if it's automatic, so you have to, it's limited in as much as you have to have a fixed height. And also, as I showed at the beginning, I need to get this out of the way, you want the vertical scrolling off, because as this increases in size, if scrolling is enabled, you get the scroll bar, which A, looks messy, and B, it really, really slows it down. And if we look at the horizontal panel, it's exactly the same logic. The only difference is we're using get layout set width rather than set height. You can scroll panels up and down, left and right. You can scroll them in from the right to the left and vice versa. So there's a lot you can do with it. And the other really cool thing is scrolling the panel, everything within it. You can put all your content within this panel, and as it scrolls open, it'll just appear. So you're only really applying code, script logic to the parent container panel. So it's quite easy to manage when you're building a more complicated app. Any questions on that one?
I'm looking at the chat, but so far people are just sending greetings.
Okay, so, I'm racing through quite quickly because I'm aware of the tight time slot, but if people have got questions, definitely ask, because I will just zip through as quick as possible.
No rush.
No rush. Okay. The only other thing I've done in this app as well, you'll notice, is if I hit run on this, changes, and it's purely a cosmetic thing. For the vertical panel, I've got a button, but I've got a transparent shape over the top. I've put the code in the transparent shape, whereas the horizontal panel, button, I put the code on the button. The reason I use transparent shapes, I think it looks tidier, whereas with a button, you get some sort of button interactivity. I mean, I know you can script, you can change the CSS of buttons, but you're still going to get something happening, whereas that's cleaner. Unless, of course, you do actually want it to, you know, people to change to green or red or whatever. So sit back out of that one. Let's go. Just like that. Let's kill that. So the next one on our hit list is panel opacity. Okay, this was mainly driven by a customer request because we were doing quite a complex dashboard for them, and they wanted stuff to appear and disappear, and they didn't like text or panels just instantly appearing and users clicked a button. We needed to find a way to soften it. I suspect a few of you have probably seen this on the blog post I did quite a while back. It's a lift and shift. So here I'm just using switches to initiate the effect. So you can see we can fade stuff in and out. Coded the slider for the graphics as well. So as I said, I'll put in the notes here, really, this is really using CSS styles and a single array and a few timers. So if we edit this one, so in order to achieve this effect, what we'll do is I've created 10 CSS styles just for panels. So panel 0, panel 10, panel 20. All these are doing is setting panel opacity in increments of 10% from 0 through to 1, which is 100%. If you want a really gradual fade effect, you could put as many styles in here as you want, and you could do increments of 1% rather than 10. I've just gone for 10. And then what we do here when we initialize this application is we've got a local variable, script variable CSS. We just populated it with all the CSS styles, all 10 of them. And I've also set the sun and the temperature. Let me show you that. These are separate panels. So if we go to the two separate panels, within each is basically a load of text boxes for the temperature and a load of images for the sun and the clouds. So what we're doing is we're setting them to 0 opacity to start with, just because I don't want them shown when we first load the app. And then I'm setting them to visible true. So when we kick off, say, the graphics display on the switch, ignore this bit for the moment. Basically, if the switch is on, we call a script function, fade.fading graphics. Just expand that. So this fades in the clouds and the sun. I've got a flag variable here, and this is mainly used because as we're looping through the array, we need to keep track of where we are. So the array is obviously 0 to 10. So if it's less than 11, we call a timer, and the timer is what actually gives the fade effect. It's this time delay here, 0.05 seconds between each change of CSS style applied to the panel. If you wanted it to slow it right down, you can increase this time or reduce it. So what we've essentially done is create a kind of loop statement, because we've got this function. We go to the timer, and then we go to here. So this timer is pretty much saying, if my flag's greater than -1, then what we do is sun panel, we set the CSS class to the flag graphics value. So we know the flag graphics value initially is 0, so it'll be CSS class 1, which is panel 0 from your styles. And then once we've set it to 0, we then increment the flag variable by 1. So when we do the next loop, it'll obviously pick a different CSS style. And then the second part of the script is extra. This bit here is really when we turn the switch back off, it will fade it back out again. So we loop back at the very end. We go back in again, and the flag, after the first run, the flag will be set to 1, so it's still less than 11. So then it goes back into the timer again, and it does the whole thing again, and it increments the flag variable, and it applies the next CSS style in the array, which will be panel 10, and on it goes until we get to the end of the array, which we know is 100% opacity, which means everything's visible. And it's exactly the same when we fade stuff back out. We start at CSS style 10, and we loop back through until we get to CSS style 0. The cool thing as well, again, is because we are fading the panel in and out, we do not need to do any scripting on all these images. If we fade the panel, everything contained with that panel fades as well, which is really handy. So you can have whatever we want in it, tables, charts, any other images, and it'll all just fade in and out nicely. So it's quite simple code. It's just getting the timers right and deciding how many CSS styles you want to sort of streamline the effect. The one thing I have noticed with both the fade effect and also the drop-down effect is network latency does have a big impact. I was chatting earlier on a different laptop, and there was all sorts of security on that machine, and it really impacted network traffic to the SAP tenant, which just viewing an analytic app's fine, but once you start trying to do a lot of this scripting with looping, it does slow it right down. So something to be aware of if you are going to start doing a lot of this kind of scripting, is it can be impacted quite significantly by network capacity. Assume no questions on that one.
There was a question, and actually first there is a question from my side, because I'm not the UI developer.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't spent much time with that, and I found that the concept of CSS was even much more difficult for me to understand comparing to JavaScript, because JavaScript is still some kind of coding, right?
Yeah.
But CSS was a pain for me, or still is. So how was it in your case?
I guess my starting point is slightly different, because I didn't know a single line of Java until I started playing with Sax. I'm kind of self-taught on the Java side. But coming from a Webby background, the if then else logic of Webby formulas, Java, I found quite straightforward. CSS, I suppose it's not. The one thing with CSS is a lot of it is it's not really documented. In normal SAP, when you're building scripts in SAP Analytic Apps, control space, it prompts you with all the various parameters. You don't get any of that in the CSS. It's kind of just reading through this and hoping you've got the syntax correct. But I think it's quite straightforward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then to the point that you just made, trying to make things like working as you expected. There was a question from Chow, and I hope that I properly pronounce the name. How do you debug this stuff? Did you plan to discuss this at all, or if not, then maybe just a few tips from your side?
Yeah, debugging is, I guess, the first part of debugging. I mean, if you get something syntactically incorrect, it tells you straight away in the script editor, doesn't it? So highlights it straight away. This will say this variable is not used. So it'll tell me. So that's straight away. If you've got the syntax correct. But then if you are if you're trying to get output from a table, or you're trying to get dimension values, then it's basically console log. That's kind of what I use if I'm doing a script that's getting data or getting a value, and I want to know it's getting the right value, then I'll console log the output in Chrome, so I can actually see what's being pulled out the other end. They're the kind of two things really. If the syntax is good, your code is, at least it runs, then it's then console log's really there to make damn sure that what you've written is pulling whatever value it is you want out correctly. Kind of, yeah. I mean, I'd be interested to see if anyone else uses any other techniques. I mean, that's kind of the two things I do now. Make sure it's syntactically correct, and then I'm always console logging if it's more complex stuff.
Sure.
And with stuff like this, it's not data. There's no data behind this. There's no data source. It's just coding it, seeing what happens a lot of the time. So especially with the fade effect, it's when I first started having a go at trying to create it, it was write the code. Does it work? Does it work the way we want it to? Is it too fast, too slow? Is it whatever it might be? And then just tweaking and trying to think how to get it working as we'd like.
Sure. Thanks, James. And as James mentioned, if anyone would like to share their tips or their practices to debug analytic application in SAP Analytics Cloud, just share in chat as well.
If there's no other questions on that one.
Not for the moment.
Let's go to, I will jump back through. Let's do text search as a filter. Right, so this one is kind of a work in progress. Again, it was a customer request. They kind of just wanted a search box within an app, just to a real basic one, just to put a text string in and filter a table that way as a free text search. I thought, well, how can we do this? So I've kind of over-engineered this example ever so slightly, because we've got case sensitivity and partial matching allowed as well. But I think for now, let's turn case sensitivity off. So if we just type in, I don't know, JA and hit filter. So it's just only those dimension members that have JA in their description. Or we could do case sensitivity on, and we can do got maybe R8 is a good one. It should just bring back Kiran Raj. Turn off again. So it's a very quick way just for end users to filter data sets. So if we edit this one again is kind of just using arrays and pattern matching. Let's just sit through again. This is based on the SAP sample data set. So just two panels again to organize it. I've got a table and a chart. We don't really need to look in that. Let's just sit this open. So let's go for the filter button, because that's actually what's initiating all the action. I'm going to ignore, again, if this is too small, shout, and I can increase the screen size. So we've got four possible combinations. We've got case sensitivity on or off, and we've got partial match allowed or not allowed. So it gives you four combinations. For now, we'll just look at case sensitivity is off and partial match is allowed. So what we're doing when we click the filter button is, again, I've made it dynamic. We're just grabbing the first dimension in the table. I know there's only one dimension there anyway, but it's just force of habit. So we've grabbed the table dimension, which is sales manager, and just populated a local variable with that. We've created a blank array variable called matches. It's just a string. So look at that. It's literally just a string variable. And then what we do is, depending on the parameters that we've specified here, so I want case sensitivity off and partial match on, I've got a function called case off, and I've got a function for all the other different combinations, but we'll look at case off. They all work the same way. So we go to case off. So what I'm essentially doing here really is, the user can put any alphanumeric characters in that search box, and they can use upper or lower case. So what I'm doing is I'm grabbing the input field value, and I'm, whatever value is entered, just setting it all to lowercase and writing that string into a variable called input field value, which is another local variable defined as a string, funnily enough. Once I've grabbed the value and put it into lowercase, any filters on the table and chart, just removing them. Again, that dimension we talked about earlier, filter dimension, it's the first dimension in the table. So we're just removing the dimension filter. Then what we do is we just check there's actually something in the input field value. So if the user's hit filter and it's blank, then it's going to be 0. So I'm not going to run any code. So we're saying if there's more than one character in that value now, we'll start looping through stuff. So what we do is we basically get the result members of the filter dimension. So filter dimension is sales manager. We grab all the values from the table for sales manager, and we basically we do a pattern match. So we write them to the variable member. We then get all the descriptions of those dimension values and convert them to lowercase. So sales manager, in this case, the description value is their name anyway, so that's fine. We check if they're included in the value that the user's put in the input field. So if I type in Janet in the input field, it'll be Janet lowercase stored in my my variable here. And then if any of the member descriptions are equal to Janet, so Janet Berry, the sales manager, we push the dimension member ID into the matches variable. So basically what happens is every time a description matches what's put in the input field, we push the corresponding dimension member ID into an array. And then what we can do is just filter. So we can filter the table on the filter dimension, which is sales manager, and all the values in the matches array. So it's quite a basic sort of pattern match I've done, and then just populating an array variable, and then we just use those array values as the filter values. And we know they match because we're pushing dimension IDs into the array. So we know those dimension IDs exist for that dimension. Again, I'm sure this could be expanded on and improved upon, and there's probably a lot you could do with it. But if you ever need to do a basic sort of search functionality, it works quite well. Obviously, I've based this on one dimension. I'm sure it'd get more complicated if you had to, I don't know, if you had a table with 3 dimensions and you wanted to be able to do a search and regardless of whether it's dimension 1, 2, or 3, do the filter. Certainly possible, but probably a bit more complicated and time consuming. But useful. So if there's any questions on that one?
Sorry, I had to unmute my mic. So I don't know if it was related to this one, but Mohammed was asking, can we control the width of the toggle switches?
The widths of the toggle switches, you mean these?
I assume so.
Yeah. I mean,
yay!
You can drag and drop. I think in SAC, if I'm being honest, I think there's probably that switch there width 48. I'm sure if I put something like 16 in, it's going to just say no. Yeah, 48 is the minimum. So there are limitations in SAC. Certain widgets have, it's like a panel, the minimum width and height is 16 pixels. Switch widgets 40. I didn't know that, but there you go. It's 48 pixels. So yeah, well, you don't have to use switches. You could use, I just use a switch because it's a built-in widget. It was just easy to switch on and off. I'm sure you could use your imagination. You can have buttons, you can have images, you could do whatever you want just to flip. So I just used a built-in switch.
Yeah, Mohammed is saying, great, thank you.
Cheers, Mohammed. Okie doke, let's do the whistle stop tour continues then. Let's go through. So we've looked at fading, we've looked at drop downs, we've looked at a bit of text searching. This one, I'll quickly show this app. This is very closely related to what I built for a customer, actually about 10, 11 months ago now. I've hastily built a simile of it, I guess. Let me just, this is the joy of the small laptop screen. Anybody looking at data and saying the numbers don't make sense, they're right, because it's complete junk data that I've loaded in from Excel. The data was kind of irrelevant for what I was trying to achieve here, so it's absolute nonsense. So yeah, the customer had, they were doing budgeting and forecasting, and they wanted all their KPIs. They wanted to be able to they wanted to see their entire budget across the top at an organization level, but they also wanted to very quickly drill down to the lowest level and do a million and other different things. And screen real estate started to get a real problem because there's only so many native drop downs you can put on screen before everything gets too cluttered. So we've got global filters here. We can talk about that another time, how we code all that. But really what they wanted was a menu. So this is where the drop down, this is what sort of triggered the whole drop down thing. So here, we wrapped a load of stuff in a drop down and we animated it. So that way we buy a lot more screen real estate. We're not cluttering the screen, and we can put whatever we want in here. You know, you could have 20 different menu items, and we've got links to external sites. We put bookmarking in a sub menu. So really, we're keeping the user on the same screen. We're not changing tabs. They're not switching screens as such. It's more akin to what you have on your mobile phone, really. In an app there, you're clicking the burger icon or what have you. We've also done a few bits. Again, this is something I did very last minute. So you can do. They wanted contextual help. We did some help documentation for the dashboard we built and we put it in SharePoint, but users then had to go and click through to SharePoint and read a PDF and on it went. So we thought, well, let's stick some contextual help in a dashboard. Again, this is a very lightweight version. I've just quickly dumped this in. You can put hotspots in a dashboard. So it's this kind of stuff just to help users. Just adding to, let's just turn that back off. We can zip all that away. So there's all that kind of stuff we did, and obviously a lot of you guys have seen this before. I'm not going to go through drop downs and changing dimensions and measures and charts, stuff like that. We did a bit of currency switching as well, currency numeric format switching. So essentially this dashboard kind of has two screens. We kept it the summary page and a detail page. And we tried to pack as much functionality into each one as we can. There's probably more that I could put in here. We go through edit table rights. This is quite useful actually. If you've got any customers who want to be able to slice and dice data, this is native, this builder panel. It's brilliant because you can just pretty much just bam, bam. Edit your table, take dimensions out, put them back in, and then dump it all out to Excel because everybody seems to want to use Excel still. So that kind of stuff's really useful. Just some of the native functionality is really good. If you access it through the API, people can do some slicing and dicing. Let's jump back. That's really quick on that one because I don't think we need to spend loads of time unless there's any burning questions.
I don't know questions, but I found this, this contextual help really cool.
Yeah, it's just, because to be fair, a lot of the coding I'm doing is basic coding because it's me writing it, but it's more driven by the biggest challenge I found with building analytics apps is not the coding, it's user journeys through the dashboard. What will a user click next? What sequence will they click in? What if they don't click in that sequence? What sort of help do they want? And trying to map all that out and then coding around for all the possibilities where the real complexity comes in. Because obviously, if people click in a way that you don't expect and it breaks code, then you've got a load of users with errors on the screen. So it's trying to think ahead. This was a really good exercise in that is what if they filter this, but what if they then click a different button while they filtered on and on it goes. That's where the real challenge comes once you start building more complex apps, really.
Sure.
So that's that one. Let's do this one. This wasn't based on any client requests, and I've yet to think of a proper business use case for this, but it's basically using the get layout function to create movement. I'm just showing this really bare bones one before we go into the more complex one, because it's probably just easier to explain in here. So really, I've got a parent panel, I've got a sub panel, I've got two buttons, left and right, and I click the right button and the red panel moves to the right, or click the left button and it moves to the left. And then you can complicate it even further by having a second panel. And then we can use logic so that when the panel get layout values match, so the the right pixel value of this and the right pixel value of this match. Keep going. It will trigger. We actually look at how we've coded this. So we've got panel 1, a container panel. It's a known width, a known height, quite important. And we've got panel 2, which is our red panel. For now, we'll just look at the basic code. So button right. And what we'll do actually is, let's just go back into big zoom so people can actually see what I'm wittering on about. So when we click the right button, we've got a couple of variables, sorry, I should have said. Define a few local variables, left, right, and then this is a third one for when we do the relative positioning and the collision. But for a basic example, it's just left and right. We're describing the left value and the right value of that red panel. So what we're saying is, if right is greater than 0, which it will be because it's here, right will only be equal to 0 once that red box is right up against the inside border of its parent panel. This is a way of, restricting the movement. If it's not 0, so it's not at the far most right of the parent panel, get the layout of the red box and get the right value, which I think by default is 340 in this example. Yeah, 340 pixels. So what we're saying is get the value, set right, right minus 10. So right currently on the first click of the button, right is 340, so we minus 10, sets right to 330. Then we've got to update the right variable. So we then set right to right minus 10, so 340 minus 10 gives us 330. So now right matches the true value of the true layout position of that panel. But also, we've also got to set the left value, because if we increase the right value by minus 10 here, it will grow the size of this box, and you end up with an ever-growing panel in a rectangle. It doesn't pull the left in. So every time we move it right by minus 10, we've also got to do the same and move the left-hand side in by 10. So we've got to go left plus 10. So at the moment, left is 0. But programmatically, what we're actually doing is this. 10. That's what we've done. Just moved it 10 pixels across. Whereas if you don't increment the left value and leave it as 0, this will just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then you can go. So you end up with that crazy situation.
You will get a snake.
You will get a snake, essentially. So we don't want that. So yeah, that's all we're doing with that one. Again, it's just grabbing some layout values from a panel, writing them to variables, changing the panel layout, and then updating the variables. And then the next iteration is when the person next clicks the button. You can obviously code that into a loop, which we'll see after this. And the left is exactly the same. It's just a reverse. It's pretty much identical. So this time we're reducing left by 10 and increasing right by 10 to move it back. When we do the collision, or let's have a look at this one. Make sure I've got the right one. So we just do shows bits and stuff here. I'll put this in a separate button just for ease of explanation. So this text, let's just show that collision. So what we're saying here is if the text isn't visible, and it's the same logic as before, just moving for now, we're just moving this panel to the right, the red one, as we did in the first example. But the only difference is we're just doing a bit of checking at the end now. So we're saying if right, which is the right value for my red box, matches the right layout value for my blue box, set that text to visible true. So as soon as this value here matches this value here, it will just make this visible. So you can do sort of, I suppose it's relative positioning detection, and you can do that with top or bottom or whatever you want. It's just a way of checking. So what we've done, let's discard that. This was a side project because I thought, how can I find a way to teach myself more? We created this. This is kind of bringing all those elements together, really, but each individual component is very straightforward. We're moving stuff left, right, up and down. So we've got a panel here. This is a panel. All these dots are panels. So we click right. Every time the Pac-Man panel right value lines up with the one of these dot panels right value, it sets the dot to invisible, and then there's another script that just adds one to the score. And we can just click through. Obviously in SAC you can't run scripts in parallel, so every time I'm clicking a button, the loop that's moving this ghost panel stops. So it's quite easy to beat. And what we've had to do with it, when I was building this, I just set myself a personal challenge to see how I could do it, if it was possible. So with the basic movement's fine, and then the maze is a fixed size. We know that Pac-Man can only move right and left here. He can't move up and down here because of the box. So there's a lot of known values. So a lot of it's actually hard-coded. You know, here I know Pac-Man's left-right position, and I know if he's here, he can't move left or right. So we're just blocking it. And we've got this movement on a timer. And when I click these buttons, all this is doing is setting the timer start value, either from, I think.
And how do you calculate in which direction the ghost should be moving?
Again, it's not smart. This ghost literally just goes round the maze in a set path. Okay. So I've coded it so that it can only initially it'll go right up, blah blah blah, and then when it gets back to the start, there's a flag variable, and then it kicks off the loop again. And I think I've set it to go around about 20 times max. So and this is going to be a tricky one to explain because when I wrote it, because it wasn't for a client, it was just for me. I didn't actually document any of it. I'll do my best to sort of talk a bit about what we did.
But I remember when I saw this blog post of yours describing this Pac-Man, it made me really laughing. And
yeah, I'm sure it can. I'm definitely sure it can be improved upon. But it's quite. Let me just try and. I'm not going to hit save because I don't want to break stuff. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of panels in here. So, you know, each dot is a separate panel, every single one, and we know the values of them. There's a few bits and bobs. So we've got an array. So all the dots are stored in an array. Because what I'm doing is when the Pac-Man panel goes over the top of one of these and the values match, we set that to invisible, and then we've got another code that kicks off the loops through the array of all these dots and says, if any of them are invisible, increment the score counter by 1. So that's how we can increment the score, because we've got a known number of dots and what have you. This is probably a good one if there are any specific questions from people, because this is kind of spaghetti code, really. I've got loads and loads of flag variables in here because I needed to sort of stop and start subscripts when Pac-Man was furthest right, or when he was here, or when the panel was here and he couldn't move right anymore, and same for the ghost panel. So there's an awful lot of flags and an awful lot of timers being called, as you can see.
But I think that, let's say for the project of this size, it is not important anymore how you do particular bits, but what is your overall, let's say, learning from the complexity, from dealing with the complexity of that?
I think it comes back to my previous comment, actually, of when I was talking about user journeys through a dashboard, of not knowing where this is more about trying to map out in your head, if X happens, will Y, Z, or something else happen. So that was the complexity. Each individual bit of scripting is very simple. They're simple lines of script, but it's which one of these is called, and then if one runs, what does this other one do, and that was the real challenge on this. how to animate the Pac-Man and then move it, and then also increment the score at the same time, and then have the ghost moving. And what if the ghost, when the ghost catches up with Pac-Man, how do we stop all the scripts and reset the game, and on it goes. So that was the real challenge of this one, to really think it through. This is in some ways probably more complicated than some of the stuff I built for customers, because there's more automatic scripts running in this, doing loops and what have you. So it's not very efficient. But yeah, that was the challenge. And also, unless there's any errors in the scripts, it's quite tricky in SAC. As we mentioned earlier, the debugging there isn't really debugging as such. So you kind of, if something breaks but the syntax is correct, you're kind of just going back through all the code yourself and one line at a time trying to work out which bit you've not got quite right. That's the real challenge.
And how did you come to the idea of trying to build something like that in SAC? Did you just wake up one morning and you said, like...
Yeah, I think so. I was like, what can we do? Because I started doing all the drop downs of fading. I was probably chatting to one of my colleagues, and they were saying, I said, maybe we could do a game in SAC. So we'll do Pac-Man. I was thinking, is that even possible? We thought about Space Invaders, and then we thought, no, Pac-Man's probably easier, or SAC-Man. So I said, right, we'll do it. Have a go.
Cool.
That's good. There's a SAC Wordle as well, but I won't show you that one today. I'll probably run out of time. So we are a bit tight on time.
And there are no other questions in the chat. No?
No questions?
But I posted a link to your blog posts in the chat so that people can find this as well. And I believe that you shared the link to the repository with that, or
the repository with the
code for SAC-Man or not?
No, I didn't.
No.
I did a second blog with a few extra code snippets, but again, another question for people out there: if anybody's got any great ideas of how you would document all the code within an analytic app, I'd love to hear, short of copying and pasting it into a Word document. Because yeah, it'd be great to be able to share the whole code with people, but short of going through every single thing and copying it, yeah, I don't know.
No, that's okay. As I mentioned, I think that it is nice to explain the code for, like, the previous demo where you had, 2 panels.
Yeah.
And then it is easy to visualize. But once you are getting more elements and more code, it is more about managing, let's say, this whole stuff as a single project.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, if you mess with any of the code we've done in any of the apps, if you can get one block of code working and doing what you want, you can rinse and repeat it. But then it's how complex you make it and how you hook that up with other bits of code. And on a more serious note than SAC-Man, some of the challenges we've had with other analytic apps have been global filtering, but also bookmarking. So creating bookmarks is, again, in itself quite simple, but how do you capture the current state of a dashboard with potentially global filters, maybe with variable values? And that's where it's just all the interactions that get complex.
Sure. And as well, you mentioned that, once you are thinking about this interaction that user has, you need to think ahead. But have you had as well some rounds with the real user, with your customer, where they would just go through this and then you would have this aha moment, just like, okay, you were thinking that, they would be moving through the dashboard one way, but then they completely surprised you by doing this somehow differently?
Well, yeah, I mean, I must admit, the past 2 big pieces of work we've done for clients, the actual coding of the application, it's very quick. One of the dashboards we built, we spent, I think it was 2.5 months doing iterative feedback. The only way to really build an analytic app is iterative feedback sessions with the business users. They're the ones who know what their data is, how they want it to work, and how they're going to interact with it. And it was 2 months of, we do a build, we play back, we have a discussion, we find out that actually people want to use things in a certain way, and then you're constantly fine-tuning the logic and the process so that it works how they want it to, but also doesn't break. The not breaking is quite important. But yeah, that's the biggest part, because writing codes, you can quickly work out the logic, but understanding how people want to use something is the most important bit, because you can write the most fantastic dashboard ever, but if it's not how people want to access their data or how they normally navigate through, they won't use it. So yeah, that's always, that's the biggest challenge. Is iterative feedback is probably more time consuming than actually building a dashboard.
And there is a question from Hank. Is there any function to get resolution screen of a client browser?
That's a very good question. I don't think there is, if I'm being honest. I mean, I could just file the API. I don't think there is, to be honest with you. Yeah, because that would be useful. Because then you could dynamically tailor things. No. I mean, I suppose these apps, I built this on a completely different laptop screen. But if you go into, again, you don't have much fine tuning control over it. But if we just go to Canvas, actually, what I want is the Canvas settings. What I tend to use, I don't. It's a personal preference, and I know people disagree with me. I hate responsive and flow panels, but normally just dynamic canvas size seems to do the trick, and fit to device.
Okay.
It works 90% of the time. I mean, if you've got a real, I mean, I guess you wouldn't use it if you've got a customer with a huge monitor in their reception area and they want a dashboard on that, and you know the exact screen size and you want to design it bang onto that, then yeah, of course, go for fixed size, because you know exactly what you're working with. But typically, we normally go in dynamic and fit to device, purely because even if everybody uses a laptop, we all know that there's a variety of laptop screen sizes. I found this with colleagues when I'm building an app. If I'm on a laptop at home building it, if I've got a colleague in the office, I always ping them and say, can you quickly fire this up on your big monitor in the office, because I want to make sure it looks good on that as well. The real asset test is actually physically seeing it on different hardware.
Sure. Great advice. James, we have like 5 minutes until the session with SAP CTO. So any closing stuff from you?
No, I think that all talks out there. But if anyone's got any questions, definitely hook up with me on LinkedIn, or you can follow me on the SAP forums, and I'm happy to sort of answer any questions there as well. So plenty of ways to get hold of me.
Sure. Thanks a lot for sharing. I really enjoyed this, and I'm really happy that you agreed to join our session today during the Devtoberfest. As I mentioned, I shared the link to your stuff and your profile on SAP community. I shared the link, and just would like to remind that SAP TechEd is coming. There will be similarly to the last 2 years, the online free version of SAP TechEd with lots of sessions and breakout sessions there, but there will be as well the on-site workshop hands-on part in Las Vegas during these 2 days. And should you be coming to Vegas, should you be joining SAP TechEd, there will be a session as well run by 2 SAP product experts on building analytic and planning applications in SAP Analytics Cloud. With that, I would like to thank everyone who joined. Thank you for participation. Thank you for asking your questions. Thank you, James, once again for agreeing to be a speaker at our Devtoberfest, and I hope to see you all in 5 minutes at our session with Jürgen Miller, SAP CTO. Cheers. Bye for now.
Cheers. Thank you.